Hello and welcome to Class 5. In this particular lesson or video, what I want to show is a lot of what we've been learning in the last 4 videos, which is basically how to key and put together a full comp. So much of what you see here is going to be very similar. However, we're going to explore some new techniques and some new problems, if you will, in putting together things like that. Plus, not to mention, we're actually going to go into a little bit further discussion where we're actually going to integrate some dust elements and that sort of thing. So the first being, if we look at this here, I'll frame this out a little bit, you'll see that we have this clip which has multiple edits in it. And essentially what we want is this part here where there's this guy crouching down, which we'll discuss also at the end of the class, where this man in the foreground here, he turns and looks back. And this is the part that we want to use as our background element. So to get that, since you notice at the head of the clip, it's a totally different shot, what we're going to do is use a new node, and this is new to Nuke 7, which is called the time clip node. So let's go ahead and pull that up. So the time clip node is actually pretty cool in the sense that now, before to slide things around in time, it was always a fairly challenging or problematic issue because you had to know numerically key things in and that sort of thing. But now, with the dope sheet, you can literally just grab the clip. So this is, if you're a shake artist, you recognize that this is like the time view. And then for After Effects folks that are used to sliding stuff around with the layers tab, with the layers, you can do essentially the same sort of thing. So what we know is that we want to start at the head of this shot here, and we can just, if I move this here, we might get some more real-time playback. And let's just go ahead and slide it till we see the shot that we want. And there we go. So now you can see right away that we're getting where we want. And then if we want to just frame forward and backwards, we can use the up arrow and down arrow right over in here. So let's go ahead and move this. Wait, is that? Oh, interesting. That doesn't work the way it does. Okay, well, that's okay because we can just do it this way here. So there, that's the head of the shot. And we're on frame 1, which is what we want, and there we now have our clip in place. So that's the first thing I wanted to show off, is the time clip node. Now let's look at our green screen element. This here is from the 3210 footage, which you may have seen a preview about it in the course summary. And so thank you to Mike Seymour and friends for producing this. Basically what we have here is a shot where this car drops. So the idea being is we're going to go ahead and put that car into this warehouse scene here and have it just drop down essentially where this guy is. Now we are lucky in the sense that this was shot very well, where the camera and the camera for this plate here and the camera for this plate here are set up correctly. It seems that they have probably used exactly the same lens, and the distance is measured correctly. So when we drop this in, this should line up pretty well perfectly, which is great. So that saves us a fair amount of time. Traditionally, that's not how it works, but hey, for this case, it's working just fine. So the first thing we should do is just go ahead and pull a key. So let's do that. And actually, I'm going to pause down really quick and set up the timeline, because if you look at this is only 154 frames, and we don't need any more than that. So let me just go ahead and set things up real quick, and then I'll come back. Okay, so essentially our timeline is now set up, and everything's kind of lined up the way it should be. So the first thing we should do is just go ahead and get started pulling a key. And now, if you look at this green screen, you can see when it comes to unevenly lit material, you can tell right away that this green in here is not very high in chroma value or luma value, whereas on this side, it's markedly different. And So we know right away that we're going to have to do a few different keys to get like this section here versus this section. Also, if you look at the upper part, you can see that this is going to have to be rotoed until it drops down into the green screen area. So we'll explore some of that, but essentially I think that conceptually you should probably know how to go about getting there from this point. So the first thing let's do is let's just go ahead and pull. Actually, we'll just leave it here at the head of the shot. Let's just go ahead and pull a key. So first thing I want to do is I like the IBK just because in cases where you have lots of motion blur, IBK and Keylight, you know, I think I've probably said this a few times. They both do a good job with soft keys, and you know, with this dropping, you're going to see right away that we have plenty of motion blur to worry about. So I'm not going to really spend too much time with Primat, but you know, when you try to pull a key yourself, see what you can get out of Primat versus these other ones if you want. But more importantly, let's go ahead and start setting this up. So first thing we want to do is set this up so that we have essentially a nice clean plate. And of course, we're going to have to mask off with some roto and that sort of thing. So let's see here. Let's pull up our blacks. So we want to get rid of all this material in here. So let's bring this down and maybe bring the red up to get rid of some of these other errant pixels in here and possibly some of the blue, because I do believe it is pulling some blue in there. Yep, okay. And let's go ahead and erode this so that we have a nice solid core like so. I think that should be sufficient. And now let's go ahead and patch this out. So now we have a pretty decent looking clean plate. Okay, very good. And now let's just get our IBK gizmo and connect up here and keep it nice and neat with this little dot. Okay. So let's look at the output of this. Of course, we need to go to the C green and let's see what we got. Okay, this looks out of the gates not looking too bad. Obviously, one of the things with the IBK that I found is that it does produce noise more often than Keylight does in the backing screens, but we can certainly hit that with a denoise filter as well. In fact, let's just do that right now. Let's go ahead and put a denoise in. So there we go. And we'll take this down, keep it nice and neat. And where is our little marquee? Here we go. Whoops. Don't necessarily need that much. One of the things that I find with the denoise filter, if I haven't mentioned it before, is that if you go for an area where it's an evenly lit plane, it has an easier time of determining what's noise and what isn't. If you were to do it over stuff where there's massive variances in chroma and luma, then it has to work a little harder and frankly doesn't produce as good of a result. So as you can see right now, we cleaned up quite a bit of the noise in here, so that's good. And actually, since this is digital, let's see what kind of result we get just by switching this over to digital. Not much. It's about the same. Yeah, okay. We'll just leave it at film, doesn't matter. All right, now that we have this, let's go ahead and see what happens when we do a slap comp. Let me just bring this down here. So we have this here. This is an HD plate, and this is 4096 by 2160. So first and foremost, well, why don't we go ahead and make a reformat here before we composite that. So what I'll do is just the traditional method of copying the alpha channel, and here's our B stream, where we're going to do our despill and all that good stuff. And then let's go ahead and put a reformat here. So we know that it's HD, and oh, my settings are set incorrectly because it defaulted to 2K. So let me go here, and let's go ahead and set this to HD. There we go. And let's see, there, that, very good. Now let's just go ahead and comp this. This is an admix, well, you know that. And let's see what the output looks like. Very good. So now obviously we've got plenty of green spill to worry about. So first thing I'll do is just a simple key light, and we'll just go ahead and set this to 1. And let's just see what we get here. Now that may be a little heavy-handed, but okay. Now, admittedly, I've had a little bit of time to experiment with this footage and was able to see some of the issues. The first one, which is probably the biggest issue that we'll be addressing in this video, is this weird errant line. If you looked at the mat we had, it actually looks like a pretty decent mat. And if you, if we were to look at this and then the mat, why is it that we're getting this weird edge here? Because it looks like we should get a very clean edge, and unlike hair, we have solid planes or surfaces to pull an edge. So that is something that's we're going to have to look at. I'll get to that in a minute, but also let's look at some other issues. If you look at the bottom of the car, we've got all this green spill in here, which is going to create problems. And further, if we start moving down the line and you look at the car, you'll notice we have windows, so at least we're going to be able to pull some transparency here. But then more importantly, in other parts of it, actually, am I looking through here? Let's look through this. I was looking through the denoise, which can be a little heavy-handed. Okay, so if you look at this, you can see that we're getting all kinds of green reflection, especially in here. So now, if you look at this, it's hard to pull an edge from this, but more importantly, just getting despill to work properly, and then the key is gonna knock this stuff out, because essentially this is value that is very similar to this, and these are windows that we're going to see through. So this is, as you know, if you look throughout the car, you'll notice that we have all this green reflection. So with that in mind, there's no keyer that's going to get us around this. You're going to have to do roto in cases like this, especially like, the hood and all that, like right in here. So all of this is going to become transparent. So realistically, with a key, we are now in a situation where we're going to have to do a fair amount of roto. So the question then becomes, is it easier to roto the entire car, or should you use keyers? And I can't answer that, perfectly, because it boils down to preference and what ultimately is going to look the best. But I can tell you from my experience that when you do roto, it's very difficult to make it look perfect and perfectly organic, and it'll take, roto is going to take a long time no matter what. So we're going to have to do some roto that's going to be time consuming, but the keyers are also really good for preserving edges and giving you that natural feel. So I would say it's going to be a combination of roto and keyers, and that's just kind of my feeling. So now that we've identified those sorts of things, and then actually there's one other thing that we need to look at, which I had kind of hinted at earlier, which is this area in here. Well, there's really no way to key this, because when your Luma values of the backing screen drop down, there's no way a keyer can adequately separate that. So how do we go about pulling a mat for this? And furthermore, rotoing that's going to be even more difficult, because when you can't see yourself, then you know, how are you going to know where to set up your roto or paint or that sort of thing? So admittedly, some of this you might want to paint the alpha. And by the way, as a general rule of thumb, I tend to paint the alpha in cases where you have frenetic movement, where it's not necessarily trackable and going in one particular vector or the other. So if you have stuff that's waving around all over the screen like such, then chances are you're better off painting, because you won't see paint chatter, and also you're going to be able to move one frame to the next a lot quicker than adjusting an entire rotor shape around something that's changing so rapidly from one frame to the next. So we have those three issues, which is basically the reflective areas, the bottom of this, the floor here, which frankly is unkeyable with any traditional keyer, and also the issue with that edge, which is going to persist throughout. So let's start taking a look at the various options. Well, okay, we addressed the reflections. It's going to be done with roto. So that part is not challenging because we all know how to roto, but it's going to be time consuming. A shot like this is going to take a long time. So from the outset, it may have looked like it was going to drop in pretty easily, but now we know that it's going to be something that takes some time. So, you know, I invite you to get started on roto because there's going to be plenty of that. Then for this section down here, the only way that I know of, well, is going to be a combination of things. The main thing that I would suggest is pulling a difference key. So with that in mind, let's just go ahead and branch this off, and let's get a frame hold. Oops. And tell you what, I'm going to stop down and set this up so that you're not watching me set up nodes throughout this video, and we'll come back and I'll explain it. Okay, so here we are with the difference node being put into place, and essentially I looked at frame 6 of this because the difference node basically looks at areas where the screen is different, and it's going to create a matte from the difference of the pixel values. And now in our case, you can see we're looking through a shuffle, which I'm actually shuffling the alpha into all 4 channels. And the reason why I'm doing that is so that way we don't have to switch back and forth to the alpha or RGB in the viewer. You don't have to do this, but you know, it's just what I feel is a time-saving method. Now, we're concerned with really just this region in here. So if you look at this, what we want is, let's see, if we were just to put a rotor shape in here, really we just want, our concern is nothing more than this area in here. And you'll notice that I'm bypassing this little flap here because, and actually this wrinkle in here, because in the end it's not going to produce, it's going to produce you know, matte edges as well that we don't want in our final output. What we're mainly concerned with is some of the shadow detail if we can get it, and then also more importantly this stuff down in here, which is essentially going to be unkeyable. So this green, or more importantly this green value, if we, especially if we gamma up, there's nothing here that's going to allow us to get any sort of a key. So the only way you're really going to be able to get it is a combination of roto paint, like painting the alpha, and then a difference matte to kind of help you get started and ultimately kind of finesse it a bit. So looking at the difference matte, one of the things that I wanted to show you is, if you notice here, we've got our A coming from the original pipe and then our B from the frame hold, and B is what is coming through because the B is always dominant. So in a case like this, you just want to, you know, set this so at least your viewing is going to be what you want. Now, in the case of the alpha channel, it's going to produce an alpha either way, but you know, now that we have essentially a rotor shape that kind of governs what we want, we could then mask this off using a mask if we wanted to. So something similar to this, for example. So now, if we look at this, we now have our matte area. Now, if you look at the mat, it's not very good just out of the gate. So let's take a look at the difference node here. One of the things that I've found is that its slider just goes from 0 to 1. And for some reason, okay, it's just taking a second to respond. And, you know, in the end, this is not good enough. But you can just crank on this till the cows come home, essentially, to get a better quality mat. Now, here again, it's a little bit, we're going to want to try to, you know, darken some of this. And also, all this noise in here is a direct result of the noise in the plate. So the only way to really mitigate that is to maybe connect off of the denoise here, and that will certainly help that out considerably. Then after the fact, I think your best bet is to just take the this and run a color lookup to kind of control it with certainly more flexibility. So I don't know if the master actually affects the alpha or not, which I should know this, but come to think of it, I always thought of it as being more RGB. So yeah, you can see now I'm actually able to get a little bit more out of this in terms of shadow detail. But here again, the reason why we're getting kind of a muddy result is the fact that it's looking at chroma and luma differences between the frame hold and the current frame. Whoops. The reason why we're not getting the best result is because if you compare the difference between this, which is frame 6, and this, you can see that these values are still pretty similar. Only where we're getting this real dark stuff is where we're having some major changes. But here again, just because we do have some similar values even in here, is why you're getting kind of a muddy result. So that being said, basically what this means is that you're going to be able to get some detail out of it, but it's also not going to be perfect. So this is going to have to be used in conjunction with roto and paint. So at the beginning of the shot here, let's go up here. You'll remember that when we looked at the comp, if you will, we had this lovely little edge that was coming through. And okay, now that it's done, you can see that this is obviously never going to be acceptable. So how do we get rid of that, and why is it there, is ultimately the big question. So the answer to that, and honestly, I had a little bit of time to experiment with this footage, so it gave me an opportunity to kind of see what was going wrong. But if you look at the individual channels, you'll notice, and actually you don't see, I guess you don't see it when it's when the gamma's at its default value of 1, but actually let's gamma this down and take the gain up. So now we can see a little bit more detail. Actually, maybe that's too much, something like this. So now if you look at the edge, like the tire, for example, this is the red, this is the green, and then this is the blue. Well, as soon as we look at the blue channel, you can see that we have this crazy little highlight edge that's going on. And if we were to gamma this up, you'll notice that this is just got a ton of noise in it. So this noise, like this black edge here, and then of course the subsequent bright edge that comes out after the fact in the backing color, has everything to do with why the keyer will never be able to pull this key on its own. So the way around it that I feel is probably going to be the most effective way is not only using the denoise, which we did, but also using a couple of filters, one called median and the other one called the bilateral. So now that we have this, let's just go ahead and look at the final output, which this here is the blue channel, green and red. If we want to, let me just pause or collect my thoughts here. So basically what we want to do is start fixing that blue channel. And the way I would do it is, first off, starting with a median. So if we throw a median in here, by default, its size is at 3. So if you're not sure what a median does, median, if you're familiar with basic algebra, is the middle number in a series of numbers. And essentially that's what this is. So in a 3 pixel by 3 pixel grid, it's going to look at the values of each channel and the luma values of each channel in that 3 by 3 pixel grid, and then take the middle number and assign that to those 3, or those 9 pixels. So what you then do is you get a flattening out of the variances in the image. Now, right now it's looking like it didn't actually make much of a change. Let me see. Well, what it is actually doing, which is good, is getting rid of some of these errant cables and that sort of thing. One of the other issues about the median node, and definitely also in the bilateral node, is that they're expensive. So it may be in your best interest, if you have to run this kind of, complex, or this series of filters on your plate to key it, to run a pre-comp out. So do a write node out of here and then source it back in, and then start doing your keyers off of that. Because when it comes down to rendering your comp, if it takes, an hour or 2 or even 3 to render the, 150 frames, then you're better off just rendering this out once you get a good frame that you can see is working. Then render it out as a pre-comp, and then start attaching all your keyers and so on after the fact. So as you can tell, while this thing is still drawing, it is expensive. So what I'm going to do is actually hit the pause key for a second here, and let's just take a small area here so we can actually start to finesse this and see if we're going to get some better results. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in at 300%. Once again, whole pixel increment views are definitely easier to look at, because it's not trying to do any sort of interpolation or sub-pixel guesswork. When you set this size higher, the processing time will also go up. So that's another thing. And also, the other thing that we don't want to do is process the red or the green, because in the end, the red and the green channels were okay. It was mainly the blue that we were having the issue with. So let's just turn these off. That'll also save time. And with this, let's just go ahead and see what happens when we set this to 1.5. And hopefully we'll get some better results. Granted, I didn't tweak the denoise either, but okay, so this is not giving me exactly what I was hoping for. Let's see. I can see right away that, interesting, it looks like there's also a difference between the red and green channels as well in terms of the value. So perhaps the red channel, but most importantly the blue channel is where we're really struggling. So let's see here. This is before and this is after. Oh, interesting. Actually, no. This is before and this is after. Okay, so it is cleaning up that white edge, which is exactly what we want. And it also looks like it's helping that out. So let's see what. So here, it looks like this is looking pretty clean. Now it's just a difference between, okay. It's the blue channel is actually coming out more than the green. So if you compare the blue and the green, you can see in here there's a softening of the edge of the green as the green light's spilling into the area. But in the blue, since we don't have that, it doesn't carry those green values, you get this hard edge. this right here is what's creating our line. So the best way now, of course, is to go ahead and, well, I know bilateral will actually help us with this. So now that you know the median and how helpful that is, let's take a look at bilateral, which is, it works very similarly to the median. Whoops. It's basically an averaging, once again, in the same in the same manner. But in this case, you actually have the ability to control some of the strength of the averaging. So in this case here, this positional sigma is essentially the overall blur. We can work at a 3x3 size, because if you look at this, 3 pixels by 3 pixels is basically a section like this. So really, that's about the amount of the amount of error we're getting between the green and blue. It has about a 3 pixel difference anyway. So with that said, let's leave it at 3. This here is basically the amount of blur. So as we start to pull this up, you'll notice that immediately we're starting to soften this off, and now it's starting to feel much more like what we would want. It feels much more closer to the green. So now that we've done that, let's just go ahead and look at the output without even adjusting the color sigma. The color sigma, by the way, basically is the color difference, where it sees a difference in color, how much the filter will be applied. So as we back this off, it becomes less and less, or it sharpens the image rather. So it doesn't actually reduce the amount, but it actually sharpens the image. And if we increase it, you'll notice that it just continues to blur the value more. So that's essentially what we have there, but we'll leave this at default 0.4. Now that we've done this, let's look at the output. Let's see if this actually will bring in the edges the way I hope it will. And once again, the bilateral node is also very heavy. So as you can see with this, you know, I'm just going to pause for the moment while it calculates, and then we'll come back and talk about it. So as I was noting earlier, I mentioned that the bilateral and the median filters are very expensive. And this point was proven pretty well, because this took forever to draw. And in the end, what I had to do is just, you know, stop it down and try to play with the values, you know, little by little, to see what I could get. And ultimately, you know, instead of sharpening the image using the color sigma to back it down, I found that really softening this off and pulling this edge in. Now you can see that we still have some of this white line. And so at this point, I've realized that I'm coming up against kind of the threshold of what I can get out of these. But having said that, this is what I was able to kind of reduce with the bilateral as well. So combining these two nodes is usually pretty, you wouldn't do it very often. So it's only if, you know, by stacking them, you're actually going to get better results. But in this particular case, we are getting a slightly better result. So what I was going to illustrate is this is what we were able to get by tweaking the bilateral a little bit. Also with the median, I'd say while its default is 3, one of the other things we could do is really speed this up by taking it down considerably, because you're still going to be getting some of that averaging, which is what we want. And once again, you can see how long it's taking just to calculate these. This doesn't even have the denoise on it, which frankly, you know, if it comes down to it, when we're looking at the key itself, not looking at our final output. So obviously the fact that we're looking through all these nodes at the end of the pipe here, the end of the comp, will make a big difference. And well, actually it seems that maybe we're getting better results having that. Yeah, okay, so we'll see this, leave this at 3 pixels. And I decided to turn the green channel back on because I felt like it was actually helping to have all three of them working conjunctively together. So there we go. You can see right away that we had much better results by having all three channels turned on for that. Okay, so that being said, now you can see we still have some of this edge issue going on. And so there's a couple other things we can do to try to adjust this. Last week or the week before, I think I talked a little bit about the Admix node, and this is one of those places where I feel like the Admix is actually going to help us out tremendously by being able to soften off the blending. So if we pull up the Admix node, and realistically what we want to do is kind of adjust the curve for the A, because it's the A over B. We want to take this curve and adjust it down. So let's see what we get just by taking this down a little bit. So hopefully this will actually soften off this edge. And then after this is done drawing, there's one other thing that I want to show, which is ways to treat along with the D-spill, ways to treat the plate so that if you do have edges, you can kind of blend them in a little bit better, so it's not trying to take a de-spilled green backing color and put it in place. Oh, okay, so here we go. So like I was saying, this does help tremendously, and if we now go and look at the difference, I'm sure we'll have a marked difference in what the edging looks like. Now, this doesn't take into account also the issues around with the motion blur, so that's another thing we should look at as well. So perhaps rendering this out at this point and seeing where we're at would be a good use of time. And as you can tell, because this is so expensive, I might actually just run this out because you can see how long it takes just to process this small little area here just for these two nodes here. So to kind of maximize efficiency, what I'm going to do is just render this out as a pre-comp and then sub it back in. And then we'll also talk about ways to kind of treat the edges without having to go through the admix, where you can retain some of the color as well. So you're not trying to compete with this really high luma value green against the background, which is not so high in luma value, which is because of that they're kind of competing against each other, and that's also helping to drive this lovely little edge that we're seeing as well. So now that you can actually see this, you can see right away we've made a nice difference between this side here and this side, which is not being redrawn because we're not doing it in this DOD viewer here. You can see that we're actually cleaning this up considerably. So I think at this point I'm going to stop this down and we'll look at the output of this, and then we'll go into some further refinements in trying to blend this edge a little bit. Okay, so here we are. This is what we were able to produce. Right away it's looking, halfway decent as far as this edge is concerned, although I can still see some of this edge which we'll have to address. Also, you can see that the roto for this top part of the car is not here, and tons of stuff that needs to be done. And then more importantly, some of this motion blur stuff, you can see how this edge from the D-spill is not really looking the way we want, so we're going to have to do some other edge treatment for that. So, and then, this is with the difference key that we pulled. So once again, some work is going to be in there. And as you can see, we've got all kinds of transparency issues because of the reflections. So now that we've done this, I think the next step is to just kind of go through how I treat the edges. So let's take a look here. So here's our car, and I think that we were looking at, what was it? Somewhere around in here, takes a second to draw. Mind you that pre-render that I talked about, I rendered out a pre-comp, and in here I've got the read file checked, so I can just immediately, just as soon as the frames are rendered, it'll just take the cached rendered frames and start piping that through. Then, you know, a little bit more refinement, little holdouts here and there for the what is this called? A ground plane, the difference mat, and then also another garbage mask for this section here. So this is all very preliminary, and we'll look at that'll get squared away in the future here. But more importantly, let's take a look at what we have here. So if you look at the D-spill versus the non-D-spill, I can see right now we got tons of noise in here. So the first thing that I think I would do is probably take this screen balance back. And as you can see, now we're not getting nearly as much noise. And then in here, obviously, because of this is still very high luma value. And when we look at the final comp, this has, you know, this very hot edge going around it. So the next step, I think, to dealing with this is just do a simple key off of the green channel and then just use as a matte. We can tweak that and we can grade that down. So if we take a grade and then just take a keyer off of the green, and let's see, we can just do what green keyer here, which is a channel key. And let's take this, make sure that we're not getting any. So it's okay if we have some of that reflection stuff in there. If we need to, we can probably hold it out with other keys, like the key that we have, to kind of bolster some of this. Also with roto and that sort of thing, we'll be able to kind of treat that. So, but more importantly, let's see what we got here. And let's look at the output of this. And actually, let's just go up to where the green area is, because that's our real area of concern. And start tweaking on this. Oh, here we go. So now we should be able to get something that's okay. Now we're starting to get those edges in. And so with this down like this, we can see right away that we're getting essentially that motion blurred edge. And then now we'll refine that a little bit with a color lookup. And then we'll tweak the keyer itself. So here, if we take this and once again start messing with this, we can pull this back so that we're eating into the edge a bit. Now, if we take this down, we definitely need to hold on to the car. And now if we look at the final output, let's see what this looks like. So now this edge is starting to look way better, and now it's starting to blend in. So this is how I think the best way to treat some of this. Another thing we could possibly do is to take the screen mat and maybe take the dilation back slightly. I don't know if that's going to help. Oh yeah, it does a little bit. Actually, well, it may be creating too much of a dark line around just on the edge. So maybe we'll just leave this alone. But at least now we're starting to integrate those edges better. And if we go back to frame 6 or 7, wherever we had this edge before, now it's starting to feel better. And now I think that we should be able to continue on. So with this being said, I think the next step that I want to show off is the integration of these effects elements. So if we look at these, let me frame this up. You can see we have these various bits of smoke that we can now composite onto the background plate, and when the car lands, then it'll look like it has some smoke and all that. So I think the next step that I'm going to do at this point is one more time, stop down, and then we'll come back and I will have a much more comprehensive node graph, and then we can just talk about the integration of the dust elements, and basically from there you folks will have something that you can use as a blueprint and then try and take this on yourself. So we'll be right back. Okay, so we're back, and this time I have gone through and started adding lots of roto to the shot. I've worked on the key a little bit to make it a little bit more dense in the car in addition to the roto, and now it's starting to feel like it's sitting in pretty well. You can see that we've also integrated some of these dust elements that spill out from underneath the car. So let's talk a little bit about the script and how I got to this point. And then also, if you see fit, you can take this now that you have this, you can either try to recreate what I've done here, or take what I have and continue working with it. So let's just talk a little bit about the script. So the first thing I did is I re-rendered the pre-comp, and of course you'll have to render this out yourself because the file size will be large enough that you don't want to, I'm not going to upload it. So if you want to, just re-render this, set your path accordingly, and this will take some time because by adding the median and the bilateral together, and then of course the denoise, is a lot of CPU time. But basically here, like we started out, this was the key. I just kind of tweaked the key a little bit with a lookup. And then this roto, of course, was the green screen area, which is basically our garbage mask. And then over on this section is the roto, which is then being maxed in with the key, so that now for the parts of the car that were transparent, this roto takes care of that. And then over here, as you remember, this is where the difference mat is, and then of course the area that we just wanted for the difference mat is being masked out here. So we could have used a key mix, but I chose to do it this way. No particular reason. You can do, there's more than one road to Rome, if you will. So that's essentially the key. Now let's take a look at what we have one more time. Let's look at this. One of the things that we were able to accomplish with the median and the bilateral node is getting rid of the cables. Now, it may be that you want to add the cables. This is a creative decision I'll leave to you guys. If you notice, there's nothing holding this thing from the ceiling, so the way I would go about adding the cables maybe is to, let's look at this here. You can see we have these cables in here that could add some value to how the shot goes together. What I think I might do is this, I'll just go ahead and reformat this to our root format, which is HD. And let's look at this. So I would actually just take a key light. And by the way, this reformat, mind you, I should also mention that I've done it at the end of the pipe here before adding it over. And the reason why I waited till the end was because it gave us more pixels to work with on the edge to basically refine our edge detail a little bit better. So obviously the more resolution you have, the more control you have over fine tuning something. But for the case of the cables, we're not actually going to use the green screen as our fill, but we would use a constant. So what I would do here, we'll just take a key light for this particular case. Or actually, you know what? No, let's use it just a regular channel key. So keyer, we'll use the keyer. So with this in mind, I'll set this to green screen so it actually gives us the correct look. And now that we're looking at this, let's look at the alpha channel. And let's go ahead and start sucking this up a little bit. So we have something kind of like this. There we go. maybe a fairly soft key is good because these cables have lots of motion blur. And then we'll use a constant now to get what we want. So what we're now going to do is copy this into the value of a constant, and then ultimately what we can do after this is add this to the background plate. So let's go ahead and branch and add mix. By the way, my keyboard shortcut, in case you don't know, is Shift A. So that's a default with Nuke. So Shift A brings up the add mix. Now that we have this, what we also need to do is mask this off. So let's take a roto shape and just grab this section right here. Now it may be that you're going to need to use a few different keyers to bring these in, because as you can see, the green screen is definitely unevenly lit, and we've established that early on. But this gives you the general idea. So one of the things about this shot is that it's mainly time consuming more than anything, because you have a lot of stuff that's unforgiving, and that's essentially what we wanted to kind of explore. Is now you can really see what the limitations of keying are and where you actually have to get your hands dirty and do roto and paint. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and hit the mask option. So we'll go ahead and mask this, and there we go. So now you can see we have our masking, and honestly I don't want the top of the car, so we'll just do something like this. If need be, we could feather this edge a little bit, like so. By the way, I'm just holding the command key and then dragging over here on these tangent handles, or these vector lines that proceed outside of the shape, is how you adjust your feathering of the edge quickly. And then also, if you grab the inside points, those will feather going the other direction. But now that we have that, let's close our properties. Now we have this. So you should start to see some cabling, which you can see now right away. And then what I might do actually to make this feel a little bit more natural is sample the color. So if we go to, for example, our car, let's sample the area that looks like this value in here. So now it's not solid black, and if we look at this, let's see, you can see that our cables are coming through very faintly. So we might want to maybe adjust this down slightly so that they come through a little bit better. So this is the manner in which I would start adding the cables. And they don't need to be too dense, because in the end, when they're moving around in the shot, that will give the feeling that they're actually there. So this is how I would add the cables. And then more importantly, if we looked at, let's go back and look at the top part of the shot here. If you want to try and retain these, I would say, yeah, these things are waving around quite a bit, so probably just painting the alpha. This is going to be very time consuming, but it will bring some realism to the shot, so that way it looks like they're actually suspended from the rafters of the background plate over here. So there we go. So at least then you would have a way to tie the car in with the background element a little bit better as well. So that's how I would approach that. And then lastly, let's talk a little bit about the color correction that I did. As I noted earlier, we were using a key, just a channel key in the green, to bring down the values of the edges here. And then one of the things I noticed is that, you know, it's darkening the car as a whole. So what I decided to do is stencil out the green screen matte. If you look at this, I just basically decided to stencil this area out so it's not color correcting the car so dark, but mostly just the edges and making it feel like it's blending in with the background plate much better. So that's what I did, and you can see right away that I was just using a combination of both the Roto and the original Kier to get that. So that's what I did there. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about was the blacks. I actually matched the blacks using a grade here. And the easy way to do that, and this is pretty cool, is if you gain up, you can see right away where your blacks are. And you can literally set your black point by going in and color sampling. So this here would be a nice dark black area. And then if we go to the background plate, you can see right away where we have black levels. And this in here is probably a good sampling area. So you just take your lift, and this is where you would actually establish your black level for the plate. So now once you do that, if we go back here and look at the final output, let's see here. This now, you can see originally they were pretty dark and pretty dense, and it was feeling like it wasn't quite there. So now by virtue of lifting those blacks, now they feel much more like they're sitting in with the plate. And then the last thing that I did is I just kind of warmed up the shot because it felt like it was a little on the cool side. So just by virtue of warming it up, makes it feel like it's taking on some of this low color temperature light from the vapor lights in there. And then the last part here, which is the smoke elements. So if we look at this one more time, you'll notice that we have these smoke elements coming off of the car as it lands. So how I went about that is very simple. It's, if you look at our smoke element here, I essentially timed it so that I matched it to the first frame of when the car lands. So actually this isn't probably the best one, but let's look at this one here. So the car lands right around 31, I think. So using the time clip, I time slipped that to give us where the smoke starts to generate. And then pulled a simple Luma keyer, and from there I held out the section that we want. Since we don't want him, we just want the section here where the smoke comes out. And then once again, since these things are in, what is it, 4K or, yeah, 4K, I reformatted to the original plate, and then, whoops, didn't mean to do that. Let's look at the elements themselves. So then really to line it up just with the car in place, I took the this last transform node here, which, you know, as you can see, I just moved that in so that it's coming off of the, well, for example, this tire right here. And then the last thing that I did was basically color corrected them so that if you look at these, they're not so crazy high color temperature, but once again, feeling much more like dust in the actual shot. So basically that is where it's at. Two things here, or actually three rather. If you want, just go ahead and finish out the roto. Maybe take this method that I was showing for getting a key for the ropes and start adding some ropes in there. And then if you want, you know, this was the keyer that I did for, you know, my key. But if you want to try to get a better quality key and sub it out for this section in here, actually put in a backdrop. I'll just say that this is my key. And then the last thing that you can do is, if you look at the plate, we have this guy here. But if you go back, let's go to the head of the shot, or somewhere in here and look at before we time slipped it, you'll notice that we have plenty of material to work with to paint out that guy. So I would say go ahead and paint him out and prepare the plate so that, you know, go ahead and paint and then remove it from here. Then, you know, you'll have a clean plate here without this guy in it, and then you can move forward and finish the comp out that way. So maybe I'll just make a little note. I'll put a little sticky note in here, and maybe a couple other notes of what you can do. And point being, have some fun with it. Next week we'll still be working with this plate. We're going to look at using some particles. And I think we'll probably look at the shadow caster, which is another 3D option that we can use to generate some cast shadows from the car onto the ground plane over in here. So that's essentially it. And thank you for your time. And hit me up with the forums with questions. All right. Have a great day.